Thank you everyone for joining. Obviously, today we're talking about delivering early and often via story slicing. For everyone who's joined, thank you for sharing your lunchtime, or maybe depending on what time zone you're in, just time in general with us. If you have any questions that you want us to answer or any topics specifically that you'd like us to cover, feel free to put those comments in the chat so we can make sure to address them. But before we get started, I guess I will introduce myself along with my co-host. So my name is Jai Mansaray. I'm a product consultant here in Industrial Logic, and I've had the pleasure of working with these two beautiful people over the past 3.5 years. You want to take it away, Tara?
Yes, because we started I think the same week.
Yeah,
which is wild,
really close
right?
to each other. Insane, actually. Yes.
Yeah. I'm Tara. I hail from Minneapolis, Minnesota, originally from the East Coast, though. Little bit about me. A lot of my work is focused around the product UX and organizational behavior space. And when people ask me what that means, I say I try to teach people to have more self-awareness and to not be jerks to each other. Because while we think that might be an easy thing, it isn't always. It's a little bit about me. Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim, sometimes known as Agile Otter in certain circles. I'm the old guy in the group. I've been in software since 1979, and I think I'm coming up on 15 years with Industrial Logic. I do a lot of work with teams and productivity and process and technical skills. And if you've been around a long time, you get to know a lot of things. So I get to use everything now that I'm with Industrial Logic, and I'm enjoying this.
Nice. Well, thank you all for joining. This should be a great conversation. I think we should just jump right into it.
Sure.
Delivering early and often, I think considered a myth by many, right? Or a false promise. What does that mean to you all in the, I guess, the grand scheme of things before we get down into the details?
I guess I can start. Deliver early and often. I think we have this. There are things that we want to do in software, and then there are things that we actually do. So I think that a lot of people go in with good intentions saying, yes, we want to make sure that we're delivering in small slices and doing all these things. But then they say, but the reality is we have all these things that are in the way, and the things that are in the way become the workaround. And instead of it being a conversation of okay, but what if we talk about the known constraints and think smaller? And I think a lot of times, we're convinced that we have less power than we have, and we're convinced that there's no other way. And so for me, deliver early and often is the conversation of being more strategic and getting ahead of the game a little bit and shifting the conversation from not what we're not capable of, but if we changed X, what could that mean for Y? That's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I think sometimes people hear about delivering early and often, and what they think is delivering the same things we always deliver faster, and that apparently that must involve working harder. And I think they don't realize that the idea to deliver early and often is that you deliver parts of things, right? So I'm not going to deliver the entire system twice a day, a system size thing 3 times a day or 8 times a day. I'm going to deliver a small change very often. And that allows us to steer. But most people don't think that way yet. They just think harder. And they still divide up their work. They take a big thing to do, a cathedral, and they break out, the explosion view of like they do with an engine, all the parts that must be built. And then they send them all out to be built by people simultaneously. And you can't assemble the thing till the last piece is done. You can't go early and often that way. If you're slicing for assignment, you instead have to break things down for delivery, because you have to deliver small bits to go more early and often and get better feedback.
Nice. What are some tools that you all tend to use, or at least start with, when you're trying to get teams to shift their mindset about how they think about the work?
Well, I know for me, a tried and true thing to get people to really understand beyond whatever Jira board / Azure board / whatever tool they're working with is to have them story map out whatever it is they're trying to understand, to get a more visual view into what it is you're actually trying to solve for. Because I think a lot of times that helps kind of shift the conversation. If I keep hearing the words requirements over and over, I kind of want to take an eraser, like a whiteboard eraser, and be like, okay, but can we stop saying requirements? And I've actually had plenty of people say, well, why can't we say requirements? And I said, because I don't think that you know what's required yet. I think we're assuming we know what's required, but a requirement says that's a thing we have to do. Do we even know what we have to do yet? So for me, it's about really having that collaborative conversation and moving through what the product looks like, kind of like in a 3D view. If folks have done, story mapping in the past, that's a big part of it is the collaboration. And actually, I unintentionally wore my velodrome shirt today. So I talk about this often in classes and talks, but I used to race at the velodrome in Minneapolis, which is no more. RIP. They tore it down because it was long since needing repair and the wood is endangered and we couldn't do it. But you're going at a minimum 20 miles an hour, and you have to talk, and you have no brakes, and you have to talk to each other, and you're all really, really close. And so it teaches you to learn how to move quickly, but talk to each other about, well, what if we move this here? Well, what if we move that there? I'm dropping back, I'm pulling forward. And it's kind of the same thing where it's like, well, what if we talk about doing this slice here? Because if we do, then the next iteration might look like this. I often look at them as parallel, because we have to be moving quickly, but we have to be talking to one another about, well, what does that mean then? And what's the expectation? So that's why I like story mapping as a tool to start talking about what is a doable slice, and is that too big? So talking about too big over how big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think story mapping is powerful stuff. I like, you get everything all laid out, and you say, okay, well, here are all the different steps, and here are the things we could do with each one of the steps. And you've got this broken down fairly fine at that point. And the nice thing about having like 1,000 user stories, or, a whole bunch of varieties of things you can do in a story map, is that now you can choose which ones not to do first. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really key. Like, okay, we're not going to address maybe, paying by credit card. We're going to just start off with PayPal, or we're just going to start off with call me and give me your numbers, whatever, and that can get us a quicker delivery, because we didn't try to do everything at once and build everything fully featured from beginning to end.
Right.
You want to get out early and often, you got to start learning to reject. And that even goes further once you get into example mapping, because example mapping, Matt Wynn, I think that was genius. It's such a simple idea, so easy to do. And again, you can look at it and say, you know what if we don't enforce this rule yet? What if we don't take these examples yet? How can I slice this like a hamburger, where every slice gets a little bit of everything? I think it's really great stuff. We don't see that happen naturally enough, often enough.
No. And I think that, Tim, the first time maybe it wasn't the first boot camp we ever did together, but one of them. Tim and I have been lucky enough to teach boot camps together at clients for folks who are just starting to learn how to work together collaboratively as teams in technology. I'm avoiding saying agile teams for some reason. Like, I'm avoiding the word, but we'll dig into that later. But Tim shares this really awesome image of slicing versus squeezing, and how we try and force all this stuff to get done in a sprint, whether that's 2-3 weeks or however it is that you're cranking workout. But I love the question to folks who are just starting to dig into this stuff, like, what happens when we see those spaces, when there's like a little bit of space left in a box?
Yeah.
What do? We squeeze it. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tara, you mentioned earlier, kind of aversion to people using the word requirements over and over again. And that statement, we don't know what the requirements are, I think for people who are not used to working in an agile way, or not used to working kind of in an iterative way, can be very jarring, right? Because it's like, what do you mean we don't know what the requirements are? We absolutely know what the requirements are, and we have to meet them, right? And I think twofold. One, it makes people feel safe to know what's expected of them, right? And then it also makes them feel secure in knowing that if I did all the things that you put on this list, if it goes wrong, that's not on me. That's on whoever decided that this is what the requirements were, right? And so I think in getting people out of that mindset, how do you coach people towards more of an evolutionary design mindset and an evolutionary process of let's start delivering the things that we know for certain are going to be effective first, and then continue to make decisions after that? Because that's a big
Yeah,
leap in perspective of work.
it is. And I love that you called that out, Jay, because, and I said that so callously, I think, because when I first started in tech, like 11 years ago now, when someone told me, like, or someone who had way more knowledge than me would say, like, well, that's not the way that you do it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Yeah, it is. This is a formulaic way to follow things, but it's more of a pragmatic conversation than dogmatic, right? I was lucky enough to practice with David Hussman at DevJam when I started my career, and he used to teach a class called what did we call it? It was basically like agile fundamentals, and I can't believe I can't remember this because I used to help him put together these paper packets, and he would do an exercise that was about building a software system for flights, for like travel. And in it was a formula for Moscow, which is must have, should have, and won't have. And I thought that was how I kind of learned to understand, if we're going to create something from just like that evolutionary design perspective, what does that skeleton look like? And if there are things that we must have, how do those pieces connect together? And what of those can be sliced into smaller pieces?
I might be someone who occasionally goes to extremes. I might be excitable sometimes. But when I started out, we started off with basically no planning. And then somewhere in the 80s, we got into the waterfall style of building, 2167 and all of those different methods. So we strongly believed in it. And we really did do the thing where you hire the analysts, and then when the analysts are done, they write a book and they leave, all but one of them. And then they work with the designers, and the designers do all the design work, and then they leave or are fired, all but maybe one or two. And then you hire an army of programmers. And then when the programming's done, you fire almost all but two of those, and you bring in an army of testers, right? And then the testers test. And hopefully what'll happen is that the customers will test and agree that you've done what they contracted, and so that you can get paid. That was a war at the time. No, we did it. No, we didn't do it. No, that's as designed. No, that's a flaw. And that would delay payment until, we got to the end of the contract. And we believed in that. We really did work hard. But I can tell you from a decade or so of experience, probably about 15 years in that what we did is we nailed down what the customers believed that their requirements were going to be on an early day. And when we drove that stake into the ground, it didn't move. And that's what we built for the next 3 years.
Wow.
Now, is that still what they wanted a year and a half later? Well, of course not. They started coming up with change requests, and we had a change control board. By the way, sometimes like change management, change control, management in that case is a euphemism for prevention. And our job was to make the user stick with their original requirements and not change them, because it would disrupt the design. And of course, everybody's coding now, and we can't afford changes. And then at the end, if it didn't really work, well, it didn't matter. The fact is we met the contract and we get paid, right? That's the old world. And so when I came into the world of Agile, I came in through Object Mentor, Michael Feathers, Bob Martin, that whole crowd. And we came in and we said, you know what, you really don't need that. And the surprising thing for us was that if you didn't allow yourself to have an old requirement that diverged from current needs, you could deliver things people actually used and wanted, and you can vary your design on the fly. It's a powerful idea that by not locking down the requirements and not locking down the design, we allow people to build what's actually needed, because our customers don't really want that design. They have a process, they have a thing they're doing, and they want to do it better.
Yep.
And as we incrementally give them the tools to do a better job, they become more aware of what they really need. And so delivering early and often by slicing these things thin, that just lets us do what they need us to do.
I love that there, Travis and a LinkedIn user said might and hope in quotes. Those are certainly two words that I feel like when we hear them, we're like, yeah, I mean, this is a guess. Also, the word, I was always taught the most dangerous word in software development was just, because it was never true. It's just going to be this. It's just going to be, it's never just. It's never just. There's always more.
Tim, I'm curious, when you're working with teams, and I know you said you have a bias towards the extreme. I would also share that. How do team dynamics factor into how effective you can be in, I guess, transitioning a team or helping to grow a team's mindset, even when it comes down to how they slice stories and how they assign what they've sliced and how that goes into the thinking and the planning?
Well, the biggest thing is, people work together by having patterns. Right? There's a way that I do things, and to anticipate that. Then you can set your patterns up that include, meshing with my patterns, and then we can all work together as an organization. So when you have something that has any degree of function at all, people have patterns, right? And changing your patterns risks disrupting somebody. So a lot of times in an organization that's large, we just learn to not ever change our patterns, never vary our patterns. Well, that's reinforced because about 90% of preference is just familiarity.
Yeah.
So if you brought 8 people into a room and you say, you guys can work however you want, they're going to do the way they did last time. Because that's what they know. That's what they're familiar with. And that's what they like. So in your team dynamic, you're looking at, people are worried about disruption, things changing, because nobody knows where that'll end. It'll ripple through the organization and collapse humanity as we know it. But also, I like the way I do things. I've done this for years. Right. This is my way, right? So there really has to be some kind of a compelling way of saying, you know what? Here's what our customers are wanting now. We can decide what to build for the next 2 years and then deliver it whether they want it or not by then, or we can do little things that work together. But to do that, we're probably going to have to change our patterns, right? And that's really hard for programmers, by the way, because we see the feature and we see the architecture and the design and what it's going to be, and we want to build that all. And the idea of having the restraint to let go, no, right now we're only doing these pieces so that we can release them with quality. Well, what about later on? We're going to have to change those. Yes, sure. But today we don't know how we're going to need to change those. Well, I'm going to bet that it's this way. Yes. And if you lose that bet, then that's 2 weeks that we could have done more valuable things. It's about learning to not lock yourself into a future, not to limit your options, but to keep yourself open. And that takes time. So we have to start showing how to work in this, what's the most important thing it doesn't do today mode. But it's very sustainable. And once you get used to it, it's hard to do it any other way. It's a fairly addictive. It just sounds like it's going to be horrible. And it sounds like it's going to be horrible because you hear it as a subtraction. Like right now, we're going to build this thing and we know what we're building. In the future, we're going to build the same kinds of things, but we're not going to know that we're building them. We're going to be constantly in doubt about it. And it's like, no, we're actually not going to build the same kind of things. It's going to be different. And it's going to be easy. And it actually takes a lot of the pressure out. The pressure comes from trying to squeeze a big design into a fortnight. Pressure always comes from squeezing, never from slicing.
Right. Well, I also think that, and Tim, I'm sure you've run into this plenty, but something that I have heard, and Jay, you too, like something that I've heard so often is like, this is too small. There's absolutely no way that we can deliver something like this and have it be valuable. That is an argument and a conversation that I have had so many times on teams. It was probably one of the hardest questions for me to answer with teams when I first started. When I just got my first coaching gig, I was hired as a senior digital project manager. That was my official title. But I was consulting, and every team really needed a coach. They didn't need a project manager, naturally. But when we would talk about slicing things, they would say, but there's no way. we can't deliver it. Nobody's going to want to see that. Nobody's going to get any value out of it. So I'm curious actually about how do we, what's your approach? How do you address that pushback of there's no way, that's not going to be functional?
Yeah, Bhavesh commented exactly. For lots of clients, it's either complete feature delivered or not at all.
Right.
A lot of them do not understand value in delivering small chunks. I am curious because as you all were talking, obviously, like I fully believe in that way of working, but I also just having empathy for the teams that we've worked with. You're telling me not to plan. You're telling me not to stick to requirements. You're telling me I have to change the way we're working. So when you say we're delivering early, of course we're delivering early because we're not doing half of the things that we should be doing, right? Like, what is your counter perspective to that way of looking at what you guys are saying?
I think something that I say a lot, both with org behavior stuff and this stuff, is stop shitting all over yourself. I think that we have this inner, as RuPaul calls it, the inner saboteur. But I think that it's really about this, like we're taught this way of working, and we think that way of working is how we work all the time, no matter what industry we're in. And sometimes we do need to be really specific. My partner's a building architect. She can't just not have specifics about concrete platforms and things that like people are going to be standing on. Those things absolutely have to be there so that the building or whatever she's building is stable. However, my question is always why? Why do you think that is a thing that you should do? Why the should?
What's the basis?
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the bases of most of the shoulds are because that's how we do things. Right. That's how I'm familiar with, and because it's been hammered in as a should. Somebody said, well, you've got to have your design before you can code. Well, don't actually. You can code some, and then if you make the code malleable, you can design it to do what it's doing now, right? You can change the design. And there's nobody who said you can't have a design or an architecture in mind, but I don't think you should build that design fully or that architecture fully just because you thought of it.
Right.
There needs to be, in doing the work gives you signals. You know what? At this point, that database is not going to be sufficient. I can see right now that it's not really going to be enough. We need to begin that migration that we had in mind anyway, or this particular feature needs to be split out into a separate, microservice or what have you. This needs to be split out because now we need to focus on how it's going to scale and how it's going to work, which we had in mind all along, but the code didn't give us that signal that now is the time for that. And by the way, if I had a great grand idea in mind and those signals never emerge, then building that would have been pure waste.
Right.
So we inch forward.
Something that, just one more thing on Bhavesh's point, there's two pieces that I think both clients and we as teams, I've certainly done this as well. Jay, to your point, like you have such empathy when people are saying, but this is like, how are we supposed to move forward with this? I think it's two things. I like to refer to it as evidence-based trust. So like there has to be trust with the team to say like, we're gonna fail sometimes, and that's good because to Tim's point, if we end up building out a small slice of something that's not super valuable that we thought would be, but we've tested that and it's not, great. And if you can verbalize that to a client and say, this means you're not wasting your money on something that's not going to give you a good return, right?
Yeah.
So the trust goes
over investing.
Right. So the trust goes both ways. And if we can if we're delivering early and often, let's make sure we're talking about how we're measuring success. What does success look like then? If we've got a slice of a deliverable that we're telling a client, here's what we think is going to come out of this, there needs to be trust there. I think and that's not something that it often doesn't happen overnight. It's layers upon layers of evidence-based trust. I've given you this thing. I've trusted you with it. You have delivered, or we've discovered it didn't work and we pivoted. Now we try something else. Oh, that worked. So we're going to refine it. So I think a lot of it's based in trust.
And I'd like
I think
they
don't want to receive it. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, if they don't even want to receive it till it's done, that's okay. Like, I don't want to move into my house until it's built if I'm building a new house. But if I go where the house is going to be, I can see they've cleared the land. I can go in, I can see they've got a foundation. I can see that they've got some drywall up. I can see they've got the framing. I can see a roof. Okay, with software, they want to treat it like I'm buying a thing and it's just going to arrive from Amazon. But then they're really nervous and upset that they're not sure they're going to get it. It's not going to be on time. It's like, but you can't walk out and see the software because it doesn't really exist. It's just patterns of electrons on a substrate. It's not a visible thing. Well, okay, hold on. Even if we're not going to give it to you really until it's done, what if you could walk in and you could see, oh, there's a screen, it's already handling these cases and it's not handling the other cases yet. I can see that it's doing these things right and the report is starting to shape up. I'm giving you the visual sign that I'm building it. I'm showing my status in running code and you can review that and give opinions. No, I want the living room to be on that side and the back. Oh, we'll fix that. That would be great. We'll do that. Without that, then you've only got two possibilities. And one is micromanagement, because I can't see the status. What'd you do today? What'd you do today? What'd you do this hour? I need more meetings. Tell me more your status, because I don't know what you're doing. I can't see it. What are you doing? Or the alternative is absenteeism. Hey, we've got this thing. I don't care. Don't show it to me until it's done. Don't show it to me it's done. Oh, that's not what I wanted. And those two choices are really bad. I think that the better choice is to be able to actually visit the work site and see the walls go.
I wanted to bring up, or I wanted to touch on the point of delivering often. Is there such a thing as too often? And are there cases where you have maybe the home buyer who is stopping by the site every single day, and it's like, I don't see enough, right? Is that a thing, or are most people like, okay, maybe I'll come around and look at it if I get some time next week, maybe I'll take a look. But they kind of just like, okay, they're coming out, it doesn't really matter.
I think
so this guy, if you delivered to me 5 times a week, I would quit accepting the app and I would delete it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tara.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, well, if you're lucky enough to be starting, whether you're fixing things that are broken or starting on something brand new, which is often not the case, but creating a charter and a working agreement to how we want to see things and how we want to share things. I don't think it's, I think it's important to have a conversation depending upon the client about what that looks like then. This is what we have decided. This is what we have talked about, not decided. This is what we've talked about as a team. What would feel valuable for you to see? Like asking those questions. When I first started getting into my first foray into tech was in the UX space. And I was a research English nerd. So I, of course, went into UX research. I was like, this is perfect for me. But I recognized a lot of the questions that we were asking were either leading. So customers would just say, oh, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. It's very easy to bat it away. But when it's more open-ended to say, what does success look like for you? What do you want to see? And how often? Then it's a conversation.
Wow, the time has really flown, and we are just about at 12:30. I feel like we could talk about this for another hour, but to be fair to the calendar, I think we should cut it here. But are there any resources that either of you can recommend to anyone who's listening, as far as where they can further read up about it, or kind of just do more studying about how they can implement this practice inside of the teams that they're working with?
So, of course, I popped into the notes, the Splitting Stories resource list. I put together a bunch of my favorite resources on story splitting and related topics, and you can go take a look at that. I haven't moved it over to the IL blog yet, but I think you also might want to pop into the Industrial Logic blog, and you can go to blog.industriallogic.com, and you can search for story splitting and continuous delivery and all these topics. There's some really great writing and some stuff I did.
Nice. Awesome. Anything from you, Tara?
I mean, I think there's a ton of great stuff on our blog. Also, I'm a huge fan of Melissa Perry. She talks a lot about product work, but there's a lot of product strategy and slicing conversations that are on her podcast that I highly recommend. And I am going to get a little link. I was not prepared for that and should have been, my bad.
You're fine.
Where I think that there's, oh, here we go. And I'm going to share a link. But Melissa was one of the first humans I ever worked with when it came to this stuff. So I will share that.
Nice. Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate you spending this time with us. Look out on our socials for the next live chat that should be coming here in the next couple of weeks. And everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you, everybody.